Keeps the art scene ticking. Everything we always wanted to know about art. This is a podcast of Petra Lossen. My today's guest is Eli Wilner. Eli lives and works in New York, Manhattan. He has been running his business as a master framer for over 40 years and is considered one of the world's best source for antique American and European frames. His frames are made in the same way as the original antique frames. Eli has built a collection of over 3,500 antique frames, which are available for his replicas. He created the hand-carved and gilded replica of the lost original frame for Washington Crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Leutze. Such a replica would cost about 2.5 million USD today. Eli has made frames for the White House, the Metropolitan Museum, and works with the two major auction houses, Christie's and Sotheby's. Today he tells us about these experiences and shares with us his vision of the future of art. Hello, Eli Wilner.
Hello, Petra. Good morning.
Good morning. I mean, for me, it's not morning. It's evening. But anyway, it's a good winter day. Thank you for joining my podcast. I'm very happy to talk to you, as I know you have many great stories to share with us. You are well known all over the world for the fantastic antique frame replicas you produce. So, what was your initial profession?
So initially, I was a famous painter in my own mind because my great uncle, Michael Zagajski, put my early paintings, let's say when I was between the years of 6 and 13, till he died, into antique frames and hung them on the wall with his Modiglianis and Chagalls and Liebermans, etc. And that was my introduction to framing.
And where's the connection? How did you get from the art, from painting to the framing?
Yeah, so I was completely convinced that I was a superstar painter at the age of 7, and I had a collection of every famous artist, the books on them, in my little library, and I envisioned the Eli Wilner famous bio to come. So I spent my years in high school and college and graduate school as a painter. Then in 78, reality sunk in, and I understood how difficult it was to compete against all the artists in New York, where I was located. And that, what do I do next?
Welcome to reality.
Even though I continued to paint through the years, I switched to painting restoration. I thought, well, maybe that's how I'll make a living. And I discovered that though I had the talent for it, the fumes were too much and I would get blinding headaches. And I realized that wasn't a profession I could enter. And by chance, I befriended someone who was a photographer for a gallery on Madison Avenue. And he told me that the person running the framing operation was leaving the gallery and I should go in right away and interview. And what they wanted was a full-time partner. They didn't want someone on salary. And I thought, framing, huh? Framing. I tried framing when I was 15 for 2 days, and I swore I would never be a framer. And here's my opportunity to enter an art gallery in New York. Well, I will try it. And sure, I came in, I gave them my pitch. I told them I had experience. I didn't tell them how much. And I wanted to be really an art dealer. I thought that would be a great profession. And I entered the framing world. They were selling reproductions only. And So this was, so we're talking about 1978.
Yeah.
And I stayed at the gallery till 1983. It turned out that I had a gift for placing the appropriate stylistic frames onto drawings and watercolors and paintings. My first client in 78 was Gerard Stora, one of the principal art dealers at Wildenstein.
Yeah.
And he terrified me because I had never done anything. I've never worked with, drawings of the quality that he brought into the gallery. And from day one, it worked. I knew exactly how to do it. I don't know where it came from, but it was just an innate ability that I had. Obviously, I've spent decades studying art at every imaginable museum in this country and in Europe. So I had a background, and I assume that between my great uncle's collection of my work amongst his works, everything being in appropriate frames, I absorbed it like a sponge, and it just came out. And I discovered my talent, not painting so much, but framing.
Okay. And then you started to love it.
Mm-hmm. So in 1983, I decided that I needed to be my own boss, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I gave notice to Shepherd Gallery, where I've been working, and I started on my own.
Okay.
I had $6,000 saved up, which wasn't very much money, but at that time in 83, it was more than today. And I received antique frames for free from art dealers that welcomed my van and my taxi cabs and my efforts at removing all the garbage they didn't know what to do with, but they knew enough not to throw it out. So they accumulated years and years of antique frames in their basements. So here I came along and said, oh, you don't need these. Can I just, I'll be glad to pick them up. And they said, oh, thank God, we'll have more space for our paintings. So I was able to accumulate between that and my efforts at antiquing, where I bought frames for about $25 each. I was able to accumulate 300 frames. And that was the beginning of my framing career.
Yeah.
I started working out of my 5th floor walk-up apartment in New York. And within a year, there were limousines outside. It was a very hot framing establishment, much to the distress of my landlord, who gave me 3 weeks notice to either stop the business or be thrown out of the apartment. And I luckily found a space on York Avenue and 80th Street where I'm still working out of, and the gallery began. Okay. And the rest was the following. I befriended curators. I discovered early on that curators curators of museum collections determine their collectors, friends of the museum's tastes. So I worked with the Metropolitan Museum curators. I worked with every imaginable museum in New York, all of them, Brooklyn, Newark, anything in the surrounding areas. And then I began to travel and meet with curators around the US. Okay. And the timing couldn't have been better, right? So this is 83. There was a boom in America. There was money being made on Wall Street. There were new collectors buying art. And the 19th century was completely, hadn't been explored yet fully, or maybe in a way, not at all. There was a painting that sold at Sotheby's that was the Frederick Church of the icebergs. The Dallas Museum bought it for $1 million. And that doesn't sound like very much, but at the time, it changed the course of the value of American paintings for the 19th century. And the curators were excited because they specialize in this area. No one was really that interested. But as always, money talks. and money and value influence collectors' interest, investment interest, and social snobbery interest. So I traveled with different curators and different museum groups around the country and into Europe. And I began to make trips to Europe, and I went to auctions and discovered that no one cared about the 19th century in Europe. They thought it was modern. They thought it was, they completely not interested. They weren't interested in the paintings as much. And they also, of course, were not interested in the frames. So I was able to buy hundreds and hundreds of frames in Europe and ship them back at auction from dealers. And the same in America. I went to every auction imaginable. There were no frame auctions, but there were auctions where there were frames. I went to Sotheby's and Christie's, where the workmen there would give me frames after every auction because no one wanted to ship the frames to Europe. The dealers in America didn't want to use the frames because they had little chips and it would cost them more to repair the frames than to buy new frames. And they were of a mind that the frames should be French. For some reason, they decided that all American paintings should be in French frames because that's what the clients were used to on their European paintings. And I came along and I said, this doesn't make sense to me, because in museums, the artists from the 19th century had specific frames that they each wanted to put on their paintings. So I began to study, and I took at the time Polaroids and photographs before digital cameras in museum collections, and I began to see patterns. The patterns were that a Thomas Cole painting from 1825 would have a similar frame in different museums in the country. So I began to assemble what each artist at every decade of his career in the 19th century and early 20th century would use on their paintings. And I began to develop a vocabulary of an encyclopedic knowledge of the artist's choice that no one had worked on before. Certainly no dealer in frames had ever approached before. And I was in high demand. The business exploded in interest. I went from selling frames for $1,500 to selling frames for $50,000 to $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
There was an exhibit at the Metropolitan. There was an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in 1990, and this was in the Lehman wing. And it was so simultaneously there was an exhibit in the Lehman wing of 17th century frames, and an exhibit in the American Luce Center study collection of American frames, which I funded. And the interest amongst the museums in America and Europe was profound. I think it was a game-changing moment in time, along with the $1 million painting at Sotheby's, and all of a sudden the 19th century exploded in interest, value, and pricing, and therefore the frames began to be very exciting. One specific example I remember, there was a Ferdinand Knopf painting that came up at Christie's without its frame. It so happened that that frame was sold to me the year before for $200. So I contacted Christie's. I said, I have that original frame that Ferdinand Knopf designed for that painting. They contacted the collector, and I sold the frame for $8,500 to them. And they were so thrilled to me, and it was exciting because I went from 200 to 8,500. But there was a normal story in those days.
Then you got your gallery, which is more like a museum, and you have around 2,900 frames. It's a collection. And if a client needs a frame, do you go to your collection, which are all originals, and then you produce a replica out of one of these frames, or how is the process?
That's a great question. So when I began, I would say for the first, from 83 to 1993. So for the first 10 years, I only sold antique frames. That was what differentiated me. The antique frame supply seemed limitless. It seemed like I could keep on restocking my collection at will for very little money. And therefore it didn't even dawn on me to make a copy. It absolutely did not. I discovered there was a collector dealer in England called Paul Levy. And it's somewhere in the early 1990s, he began to stop selling antique frames, and he only made replicas of his collection. And I began to say to myself, he knows what he's doing. Yeah. He was selling 18th century and 17th century frames, but he was a very famous dealer. And I said, I better start considering that. Maybe my limitless supply is imaginary, and eventually I will run out of inventory replacement.
Yeah. Yes.
So from that moment on, I began to, I would say, sell 80% antique frames, 20% replicas. Now, right, so now we're in today's date, I sell 99.9% replicas and incredibly few antique frames because I don't want to break the collection, one. And two, the inventory I cannot replace. And so it's gotten to a point of I can't do it again in terms of buying frames like I used to. And the quality of my replicas is astonishing, to the point that if I showed you an antique frame and the replica I made from it, you cannot guess which is which. You can't.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Once you told me that you also started a frame app company, something like a company, startup, right?
Yeah. Yes. So that was my great failure, but I have not given up. So I was encouraged by a fund manager who was very connected to Snapchat, Instagram, etc.
Yeah.
And I told him about my idea, and he said, Eli, you've got to do this. There are billions of images. You've got to do this. And from 2000, I would say exactly 2009, I began the concept of a frame app. And I'd say $300,000 later, and a lot of work, it was a dismal, complete failure in terms of monetary interest.
Ouch.
However, I have all the work I've done. And just this morning, a leading art dealer and someone you probably know, Don Rosenfeld, who produced all the Merchant Ivory movies, asked me to send him the 500 images. And he wants to create NFTs and a whole different conversation with the framing, quote unquote, app. So it's not, you never know, so this is a little bit later, right?
Yeah.
But you never know when an idea that failed might resurface into a good idea as the world shifts.
Yeah, that's interesting. You never know, huh?
So the concept is, of course, that in the metaverse that's being created by Sotheby's, et cetera, the NFTs will need framing that people are buying, spending money on.
Of course, they need.
And then I will be there first out of the gate with my application for that purpose. So that's the concept. Yeah. Whether it works or not, we'll see. But it's interesting to restart something that I thought was dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The idea was in 2010, right? And now
2009, I was on vacation in Mexico.
Yeah.
And instead of enjoying my vacation, I couldn't stop working on this app on paper, just drawing it out and working on it and thinking about it. It was, we had the first iPhones and it was like so exciting. And oh my God, I'll never forget it. And then I spent the next, years daily with my app developer first thing in the morning because he had to call India and Russia, wherever he was having it done. And we would tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. And very much the way my personality is to go all in. I don't have like a first gear. I just go right to the top and I go all in. And what I should have done is tested the market. I should have done is explore if anyone was interested other than me and this fund manager. And I didn't, because I don't have that speed. Maybe I'll learn it one day, but I'll be 66 and I haven't learned it, so probably not. So I go all in. I did that with the antique frames, and this is just my style.
Yeah. Well, you never know.
Another area I'd like to explore whenever you'd like is the frame restoration that we're doing.
How is the technical part of the restoration working?
So so what happened was people came to me, museums, and said, would you consider restoring this frame, which is the original frame, to whatever the painting is, right? So that went from my attempting that and finding that the same skill set as replicating a frame and is almost identical in nature. And you have to have a vocabulary of finishes. You have to have a sensitivity to the way the artist, the frame maker, designed and created the frame. Yeah. And we replicate. So when I do a replica, if the frame was carved, we carve it. If the frame was cast originally, then we cast it. Yeah. What we have is we use the antique frames as the vocabulary. Let's say a frame was completely painted with bronze paint. There's no original gilding left. So we'll find a similar frame in my collection and then match that surface, the color, to that frame. We're about to work on the most important Manet, one of the most important ones in America, belonging to the Rhode Island School of Design. And they're sending us the frame in February to restore. It's a beautiful frame. It fits on the painting beautifully, but it has wormholes. It might have old termites that we have to deal with. The frame has many areas of damage. It's been badly restored over the decades and heavily painted in areas. Yeah. And we will spend 2 or 3 months bringing it back to its original state. And for me personally, frame restoration has a lot of meaning because it shows that one treasures the object. Sometimes a frame restoration project might cost more than starting from scratch and replicating the frame. But the Gauguin frame or the Rembrandt frame is so important to the artwork. It's worthwhile putting in 200, 300, 400 hours of labor and attention to detail to bring it back. And so it's a very meaningful and very satisfying experience. And it also harks back to my original interest in painting restoration. And so it's like a full circle in that part of my life as well.
Yeah, but when you produce a replica of such a frame, what will happen to the original damaged old one? You will not throw them away, right?
No, so if I make a replica, it's for my own collection. No. So, and I just don't like to sell my collection. So no, the collection stays in, nothing happens to that frame. Yeah. I put it back into my inventory.
Okay. I understood that maybe a client comes to you and tells you, look, this frame is famous and beautiful and it fits so fantastic to the painting, but it's damaged. And could you please make a replica out of it?
And no one's ever approached me with that request. Okay. They always want me to restore that original frame. So that doesn't.
Out there. It's the first idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would actually want to do that because they would want the original frame to be saved.
Okay.
So I don't think that's an issue that I will ever encounter. Occasionally, rarely, I will create a frame from photographs. And the best example of that in my career, and I don't think I'll ever surpass it, is the frame around Washington Crossing the Delaware at the Metropolitan Museum.
Yeah.
So for 100 years, it was at the Met with a very thin, inappropriate, gilded frame that was almost a liner. And I had framed 50 paintings at the Met, but this one, the curator wouldn't allow me to do because she felt it was such an important painting. We needed more information about what the artist, who was German American, Emanuel Leutze, would have chosen.
Yeah.
And by chance, we found a photograph that was done by Matthew Brady, the famous photographer of the Civil War. He photographed an exhibition, and there was the painting in the frame that Leutze designed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once we had that, we raised the money, we had the go-ahead, and for 2 years or so, we recreated this frame, which is 21 feet by 16 feet, I believe, weighs 1,400 pounds. And the Metropolitan, in the meanwhile, completed a wing dedicated to the hanging of this reframed painting.
Let me tell our European listener that the size of 16...
21 feet across and 16 feet high.
16. So it is 6 meters long and 12 meters is 2.6. So it's around 4 meters 20 by 6 meters large. And 1,400 pounds, it's 600 kilo.
Very good.
It's just the frame or the whole painting included?
just the frame.
Wow.
So this is they had to reinforce the wall. They had to this frame painting will never, in theory, leave where it's sitting ever. We had to construct it in 8 sections, so it was reassembled inside the room because it wouldn't fit through any doorway.
Yeah.
On my website is a video where Morley Safer, who is no longer alive, from the morning show on CBS, did an interview with the curator, Carrie Barrett, and myself, and the entire video is about this specific project. So if anyone's interested, it's a 5-minute piece, but it's very illuminating on what was done, how it was done, why it was done, etc.
Eli, what would such a frame cost today?
Yeah, so I've been quoting 2.5 million to replicate this again because of the time involved. I had no idea. So I did not charge the Metropolitan that much to begin with because I had no idea. Plus, knew that this would make my career and my, I don't know, let's see, how would you say, my legacy would be in this frame because it is the #1 most viewed painting at the Metropolitan Museum, and it is the largest painting in the Metropolitan Museum. Yes. So I thought, so I gave him a hugely discounted price, which has to remain confidential, but it also for me was a marketing banner.
Yeah, absolutely, I can agree. But the Metropolitan Museum is not only a very important client of you, because one of your clients is also the White House.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I visited the White House back in the early 90s with the Smithsonian American Art Group that I was a member of.
Who was the current president at that time?
That was Bill Clinton.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And the group curator at the time, Betsy Brune, was so kind to me because I was honored to be part of this group. The group was made up of very important collectors of American art and me.
Yeah.
I was the frame entrepreneur amongst this group. We were in the White House And Betsy Brune, the director of the Smithsonian, asked the curator of Betty Monkman of the White House collection, and she asked her, Betty, this frame doesn't seem appropriate. What are your thoughts? And, and Betty said, I don't really know. Is there anyone in your group that could speak to it? So I raised my hand and I gave my pitch, and I gifted the frame to the White House. It was on Child Hassam's parade with flags, Flag Day parade, that is always since then in the Oval Office. So I gifted him a frame that Hassam would have designed for the painting. Yeah. And since that moment, they ordered another 27 projects. Wow. So it was a wonderful gift. And that's been always my style, you know, just give it and see. And then if there's always a return, it just always works that way. And it was working at the White House was wonderful. My work is not seen except for, you know, my photographs of the work, but it still was extraordinarily meaningful to be part of the kind of readdressing the collection, which was badly framed. They had wonderful paintings, but badly framed by, of all people, Jackie Kennedy, who was in charge of acquiring these paintings that were gifted to the White House during her short period at the White House. But she chose a certain kind of French reproduction Empire frame on all of the paintings, which was incredibly inappropriate. And I'm glad to have been a part of bringing the collection into the way it should be viewed.
Yeah, very cool story. And Eli, you also work for the two big auction houses, Christie's and Sotheby's. And is there something to share with us, something interesting?
Yes, indeed. So both auction houses have asked me to frame paintings right before their major auctions. Sometimes they don't receive the painting till a week before. Those are challenging moments where they plead with me to get them framed in time for the auction. So there's a lot of stress, but we have loaned hundreds and hundreds of frames over the years to each auction house. And in return, my name is on next to the label. So you're looking at a Picasso, and below is frame loaned by Eli Wilner. And I think that has been my number one marketing tool, because I have the collectors that can afford these paintings looking at each painting and they're seeing my name. And so invariably, that's how I collect my collectors.
Yes.
I actually create replicas, especially for their paintings. But my rule of thumb is the painting has to be worth at least $1 million or I don't get involved. So because I once didn't set a price standard, and they began to ask me to frame paintings that were $50,000 to $100,000. And there was no way that would be advantageous to me, both in terms of the lack of ability to sell the frame I loaned after the auction, and also the collector that can afford a $50,000 painting is not going to afford a $50,000 frame.
Yeah.
So I have to be snobbish, because all of a sudden, all I did was make frames for Sotheby's and Christie's, basically for nothing. And it wasn't, the return wasn't, it didn't make business sense. Yes. So I limited my, the value to the really, really valuable paintings. And that's been a great success.
But how do you manage it when you have only 1 week to produce several frames for the auction, which is to be held in 1 week?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I usually have 3 months. Sometimes there's the emergency that I dread. But normally I have 2 to 3 months, and it's such an important marketing tool that I put the energy and effort into it.
Yeah, makes sense.
More pre-COVID than now, when everyone is buying online and not really showing up for the parties, etc. But in the past, it was the marketing tool.
Yes, absolutely. Eli, may I ask you, there is a strange or funny story, I don't know nothing about this story, about the frame of the Salvator Mundi of Leonardo da Vinci. I know you were not involved in this, but is it okay to talk about it?
Yes, I mean, I have my opinion. It's not a fantastic story,
Okay.
but just like the painting is in question in terms of its authenticity and participation by students or followers of Da Vinci, the frame was done by a competitor of mine. And in my opinion, it's so inappropriate to an Italian Renaissance painting. It's a Spanish frame from the 18th century. So based both on date, style, and color. You know, it's a black frame. It is horrible. I'm so upset every time I see an image of it. However, and I have to admit to one of the deadly sins, I was so jealous that I wasn't asked. However, fortune shined a light on me, because that's not a painting that anyone wants to be associated with, because it'll go down in history. It appears as the greatest fraud on that's ever been perpetrated in the art world on a collector, this time the Saudi kingdom. And I wouldn't want my name connected to this entire venture, and with no prejudice toward the Saudis, but the prejudice toward the fact that it is most likely a blatant fake, and the frame is so stupid on it, you know, to lack of a sophisticated word, that every time I see it, I'm delighted now.
I see your point, yeah. But I think it's not yet completely clear that the painting is a fake. I mean, what I know, I'm also coming from the secondary art market. And what I know is it's always the same problem with the old masters. There's a group of people saying, oh, fantastic work, it's nice, yes. And there are some well-known people who certify, yeah, it's an original one. And then there's a group of people, they say, no, it's studio and so on. Yeah, it's difficult with the old masters. So I think it's still not yet clear that it is not an original, or if it's studio or by himself.
That's a very good point. But in a DVD that I watched about the Lost Leonardo, I think that was the title, it was clear that between all the work that Modestini did, and the way that curators and directors of museums are thinking about it, that it's been, for the moment, completely shelved as a Leonardo. In the old days, I don't know when, but if a painting had more than X% damage, you never took it seriously. I don't care who it was by. It's gone. It's destroyed. I had this lovely painting once that I had discovered, and it was 20% gone, valueless. I couldn't sell it. I couldn't get anyone interested in it because it had too much damage. Yeah. Now, granted, it wasn't a Renaissance painting, so so maybe give it a little more possibility, but not the condition this one was. But that's okay. But as you see, the Prado, has totally dismissed it. I mean, it is just being dismissed right and left. So, yeah, I don't want to be sued. I'll probably get sued immediately, but that's okay. It's just, I'm not an expert on Leonardo by any means. And I don't really consider myself an expert in artwork and paintings, but that DVD and common sense leads you to have a great suspicion that this has anything to do with the master. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting.
However, my opinion about the frame style, I will defend.
Yeah. You may do. You are allowed to. What I heard is that in Europe there is about the restoration of the painting, because it is so well done in a way that it might be too much. That's not my opinion, because I'm also not specified in this restoration, the thing of old masters. But it looks like a new one. And yeah, we call it in Germany, we say it's dead restorated. But that's what I heard. It's rumor.
Yeah. So in the DVD, The Lost Leonardo, basically the hint was it's a Modestini more than anything else.
Oh, okay.
And she's brilliant. And I knew her husband when I started out as a painting restorer. I worked in the studio of Gustav Berger, and they were colleagues. So I'd never met her, but she's brilliant. She should be a painter. She's really good, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you must be a brilliant painter if you are able to restore, however, such a painting, I think.
Yeah, no, she's brilliant. It's amazing, her knowledge of Renaissance paintings. Amazing that she has this gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eli, how about framing NFTs? I mean, this is a hype. I just had my last podcast with Dirk Boll. He's a president of EMEA of Christie's. And we talked about the NFT market, and it's just exploring. And you mentioned that might be an opportunity for you. How about your ideas?
Yeah, so my idea is that I do believe the metaverse, or this kind of altered reality you enter, this three-dimensional world, will have more and more traction, and people will be buying NFTs of different paintings. For example, I think every museum will be selling images of their paintings as NFTs. I believe the Hermitage in Russia has already started. And I believe that collectors of NFTs will display them not so much in their home on TV screens, that's possible, and that maybe also, but they'll also welcome their guests and have parties and gallery shows and museum exhibits in this three-dimensional new universe. And within that, I believe that there's a place for framing the images, because no one's going to be buying framed images. They'll buy images. Then they'll need to say to themselves, well, how do we display this on our gallery wall, in our homes that we're inviting our friends to? And it could be their friend lives in Paris and they live in California and LA, and they want to show them their latest acquisitions. Well, they'll dress them up with the framed NFTs. They'll invite them in and have a cocktail hour and show them the collection. I have no idea if this is going to happen, but I believe it will.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, maybe that's the future of framing and a part of the future of art.
I think so. I think as our society is more and more inclined to experience the world digitally, I think, I don't know if it's going to be within the next year or it'll be in 20 years, but it seems like there will be a world that is separated from physically visiting a gallery or museum. And I think it'll be more on this three-dimensional metaverse that exists in whatever. I don't know what kind of headpieces we'll be wearing. I don't know how this is all going to develop. I don't think anyone does, but it seems that, mankind is gearing toward another experience of the world. And it's not necessarily just what they can, see right in front of them. It's a bigger conversation. So maybe people will have, 1/100th of a Rembrandt that they own from the Rijksmuseum, and they'll be able to show their friends, this is our 1/100th of this painting. We just spent X amount of money on it, and we want to invite you to see it. And 1,000 of their online buddies show up. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's I'm sure there are writers that are thinking it through, but who thought that people would spend so much time on video games? Who thought people would spend so much time on Instagram, on Snap? I didn't.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. I mean, I like the idea. So if this is a part of the art future, then I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I don't see any harm in it. Yep. I don't see any. I mean, some people might lose money, right, as they overpay for NFTs. Okay. But I think some people will use it as an investment. Some people will use it as a way to think about art in a new way. I remember there was an exhibit of video art at the Smithsonian by I forgot who it was, Naum Polk. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. And I looked at these TV screens and I looked and walked around and I said, oh my God, I don't get it. I don't understand it. Who in the world would sit there and watch this stuff? Yeah. But that was, in the 90s. And now it's a big thing. It's a big time thing. And digital art and video art. And now the NFT are entering the vocabulary where in 20 years or 30 years, it might be so ordinary that I think my science fiction prophecies, there'll be holograms. Yeah. So you will see these paintings in a darkened room as if they were there, and the frames and the paintings, and you can walk toward them and you won't be able to see the difference between the real art and them, except if you would lean forward with your hand, there's nothing but light. I see that as the next kind of blending of this metaverse and the real, art, what we call the real world. I think there are many, many possibilities for the future.
Yeah, maybe your app will be part of it as well.
I believe it will, and I'm certainly going to start working toward that. Is my plan.
Okay. Eli, it was so great talking to you. We've heard many, many new things, very interesting stories. I hope once to be in front of a big artwork and to see your name on the frame. That's Eli Wilner. Thank you for joining.
Petra, this was a delight. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How's the art scene ticking? Everything we always wanted to know about art. This is a podcast of Petra Lossen.